Here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here. Today on the big program, lots to get to, lots to talk about. Crazy at all points. In every direction, it seems like we are losing our minds as a country. And the only thing I kept thinking about today, as the news kept piling up, as more insanity kept running its course, is this who we now are? Is this who we are as a country? Are we a country? The first story I saw was the governor of Nebraska, Governor Ricketts, has come out and said that, none of those undocumented are going to get the vaccine. And you go, but hold on, wait a second. Studies show 66% of the people who work in the meat packing industry are undocumented. 69% of the essential workers in the state were undocumented. I mean, it's incredible to me. And what it's saying is we don't care about those people, yes, but we don't care about ourselves either. Because these folks, they're how we've survived, but we're not going to help them. And it got me going, is this who we are? And then I saw this tweet that was recently tweeted out by this freshman congresswoman from Colorado, this Lauren Boebert. She tweeted out, I've always heard to speak softly and carry a big stick. She says, I prefer to speak loudly and carry a Glock. And I'm going, is this who we now are? Is this the country we've become? Not only do we thump our chests and say how wonderful we are, we now threaten you with guns. And I go, truthfully, yeah, probably. Because you look at Ohio recently, just passed another one of these idiotic stand your ground laws that's creating an environment where we may have to all start carrying guns. I mean, it's crazy. We see right-wing hate groups openly talking about violent activities, openly talking about a violent uprising, shooting their neighbors because they're animals or scumbags. I mean, it's crazy. We've got the National Guard deployed in our streets in Wisconsin and in our nation's capital. We've got people fantasizing about the next civil war. In fact, we've got people all over the internet talking about how they can, in the nation's capital, dodge the police and how they should travel in packs and don't let them disarm anyone without, quote, stacks of bodies. There you go. But Rick, this is just talk. It's all just talk. Just talk. Well, what this talk has done is it's created this very tense environment. Or even someone like me who's never in my lifetime felt the need to cling to a gun. I've never felt the need that I had to take my gun with me everywhere I go. I can't sleep or eat or go to a movie or to a restaurant, or I can't walk outside without strapping a gun to my backside. I'm now in this moment, or I'm considering it. This is the world that we've now become. This is because of the right-wing lunacy that is gripping our country, because of the hatred and the division that's gripping our country. This is who we have become. And you look at the Secretary of State of Georgia. While, understand, I am not a fan. He did everything he could possibly do before the election to rig it for Donald Trump. There is no question that he threw almost 200,000 people off the voting rolls to try and rig the election before it started. Went and did some of the most Jim Crow-ite things you could do. But he's in a moment where he stood up and he said, no, these are the facts. This is reality. I'm not going to break the law for you, Mr. President. I'm not going to be intimidated. And I give him credit for that. I'm not putting him up on the pedestal of a hero, but I do give him credit for standing up in the face of adversity, because he could have cowered. Now, it wouldn't have meant anything. Look, he could go and dig up 12,000 votes and we can give Donald Trump Georgia if it'll make him happy and go away. Because Georgia didn't decide the election. But he's on TV talking about how his wife is getting death threats, how his family's getting death threats. And not from those hateful Antifa people. No, this is from his side of the fence. This is from the good God-fearing, Constitution-loving Christian gun owners. The law-abiding gun owners who are threatening this man and his wife and their family. Now, he's called on David Perdue to apologize. He said, call me man to man. We'll talk it out. But this is where we are. And I've said from the beginning that this is all political theater. All of this craziness around the election, all of this insanity is all political theater. It's about raising money, tons of it, and they are. It's about list building, getting more people who are all angry and desperate on the same page. And it's about jockeying for position. And I look at this because we've really taken political theater to the next level, to the next step. And I look at this freshman congresswoman who I quoted earlier, who, she came to D.C. with a political theater plan. She came with a whole skit ready to go. I'm going to carry my Glock in the halls of Congress. I'm going to go on the floor with my Glock, and I go everywhere with my Glock. And she had a whole PR campaign. Within, hours of them saying you can't do this, she had a whole onslaught of videos and all kinds of social media and all kinds of stuff to raise her profile. To do what? Not to protect her right to carry a gun. She's got the right to carry the gun back in Colorado. She's not in the nation's capital. But it was about raising money. And she's raised a ton of it. Never mind the fact that all of the messaging that comes out of this is tearing us, ripping us to shreds. And as I said, we're in this dangerous moment where even I'm thinking that I may have to carry a gun because I need to be protected, not from criminals. And look, I've lived in some really, really bad places. I grew up in a place where if you saw someone with a gun, duck, someone's dying. Our house was robbed when I was a kid like 20 times. Actually found someone under my bed as a small kid. Saw him under the bed as I was walking up the steps, ran back down the steps, out of the house, go on, leave, take what you want. Never. And I've had these experiences. I've seen people shot, stabbed, beaten, all of this. Never felt the need to have a gun with me at all moments. So I'm not afraid of the criminals so much. It's these people like Congresswoman Boebert. It's these gun fetishists who fantasize about that moment that they get to protect themselves personally because they've got the right. They're going to stand their ground. And they're looking for trouble. For me, those are the people who most scare me. Those are the people who are most frightening because they're out among us and they look normal. You go, no, they don't fit any stereotype. They don't fit. Well, maybe they do. Angry white old guy, maybe. But we've seen this play out. And I guess my fear is that this ramp up of violence and anger and this ramp up of tension doesn't go away. And that now every altercation, every crossword, every look could now end in, people throwing shots at each other. I'm reminded of the story of, a woman had parked in a handicap spot and some guy was just incensed by the fact that this woman was in that spot and came up and started yelling at her, interjected himself into a situation where he should just call a cop. If it was really that big of a deal, call a cop, let him give her a ticket, let her pay a huge fine if she doesn't belong there. But he took it upon himself. He was going to enforce the law. And he started yelling at her. And the woman's husband, I guess, came out of the store. And like I would do if someone was berating my wife, I intervened and pushed him out of the way, and they knocked him to the ground. This guy believed that his life was in danger and shot the guy in the back and got off because he was in fear of his life. George Zimmerman is the perfect example. A guy who started a fight, got his hat handed to him, and then killed the kid who beat him up because he felt fearful for his life. Now, when I was a kid, again, this goes back to, I know I'm getting way up there. I'm 53. I'm getting way old for the times. But when I was a kid, if you started a fight and somebody whooped your behind, you deserved it. And if you told somebody, they would say, yeah, you deserved it. If I would have gone home and told my mother that I started a fight with a kid and he beat me up, she would beat me up for starting the fight. That's the society we used to be. Now we're a society go, you started the fight. Uh-huh. You got beat up. Uh-huh. You felt afraid. Uh-huh. Good should be the answer. Instead, no, I shot him. And we as a society seem to be okay with that. So I'm in this position now where, going back to the woman in the handicap spot, if you're the woman who's parked in the car and someone comes up to you and says something, bang, you're dead. There's no point in even talking now. This is what the gun nuttery has gotten us to, I think. And this is scary times for me. Is this where we want to go as a country? Is this who we're going to be? And it's frightening. Now, I'm waiting to see what Mike Pence does on Wednesday. I'm waiting to see what comes out of Pence's big decision. Donald Trump said on Monday, if Mike Pence is a good guy, he's going to do the right thing. Unless he doesn't, then I won't like him so much. Which is. But what does Pence do? Does Pence follow the Constitution because it's his inclination? Or does he want to jockey for the position of the next Trump? Now, all indications, the reports coming out are Mike Pence is going to, he's going to do what he's supposed to do. He's going to do what precedent has been. He's going to defy Donald Trump. And it's going to be over. There'll be no more screaming. There'll be no more chances. It's over. Once they certify it, once they seal it, it's over. January 20th, when Joe Biden puts his hand on the Bible and swears to uphold and defend the Constitution, it's over. The question is, will all of these people who are currently, losing their ever-loving freaking mind, thinking there's some Hail Mary that King Donald is going to be able to pull out of his derriere and save him because he said, I'm going to fight like hell. Which means lie, cheat, steal, intimidate, do whatever you can do to win. And is that who we are as a society? I keep coming back to this because this is one of these moments that liberals had better figure out where they're going. There was a woman a while ago, and Maya Angelou, I think her name was. I may be saying that wrong, but she said, when someone tells you who they are, believe them. The Republican Party has told you who they are. There are no laws that apply to them. There are no lengths that they won't go to hold on to power and to dominate. There's nothing. There's nothing that they won't do. And we're going to see that play out over the next couple of days. The question is, what will the other side, what will Democrats and liberals do? Will this be the same kind of ramp up? And if we continue this constant ramping up, what's it going to mean for the rest of our society? What's it going to mean for the rest of us? Now, I'm seeing reports coming out of Georgia that it's being reported, and I can't verify this as fact, but CNN and other places have reported that there's consideration going on in Georgia into whether Trump broke the law with that perfect phone call and committed election fraud, whether he actually broke the law. You've got a governor who's a Republican in Georgia. You've got the Secretary of State, obviously, who's the governor, who's the Republican in Georgia. And you also have an Attorney General, Chris Carr, who is a Republican. I've said from the beginning, the only way that we can save this country from the disaster and the turmoil that is coming is that there are sane, rational statesmen left in the Republican Party who are going to stand up and say, no, this insanity has to stop. No, this is not right. This is not who we are. We're better than this. We're a nation of laws. We're a nation of foundational laws, of precedent. And not just because our guy lost, because look, I wasn't thrilled when Hillary lost, but you go, oh, results are what they are. Oddly enough, and this is the irony in it, the same 306 to 232 electoral victory that Trump had in 2016, Biden has had this year. So there's some kind of, if you're one of those people who looks at numbers and goes, wow, there's some irony in those numbers. Now, the difference is Hillary won by 3 million, 3.5 million. Biden doubled that. Biden won by 7 million. So when you start going, well, it was too close. In some places, it was close. Pennsylvania, it was a close election. And while they trot out all of these allegations, they didn't do any of it under the oath of perjury. They didn't take their claims into courtrooms. Instead, what they did is they held political theater events where they created social media campaigns to anger and to bunch up in the panties their base. Why? The simple answer is money. Raise huge, huge amounts of cash. Because I'll tell you, every day when something happens, I get an email. I got an email just a minute ago from Mitch McConnell going, hey, we got a donor who's going to give us a 500% increase in whatever you give us. And I'm going, but the elections are over. All we're doing now is counting the votes. Why do you need more money? Well, it's for the perpetual campaign of keeping us divided and keeping us against each other. And the sad reality is none of this is going to change until we solve the underlying problems of inequality, until we solve the underlying problems of racial division in this country, until we find some common ground and move in a positive direction where everyone does better. What we're seeing right in front of us is the result of 40 years of supply-side voodoo Reaganomics and bad neoliberal policy. And my hope is that Joe Biden is the guy who can help move us back in the other direction. Just my thought. Love to hear yours. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break.
Standing up, and the union gives a voice to win. On the Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1804. That was the day Ohio became the first non-slave-holding state to enact a series of black codes. Ohio had previously been a part of the Northwest Territory, which barred slavery in 1787. When Ohio entered the Union in 1803, its Constitutional Convention had established the previous November that slavery would not exist in the state. But delegates were split evenly regarding black suffrage and ultimately voted to disenfranchise African Americans. Several months later, Ohio caved to pressure from the nearby slaveholding states of Kentucky and Virginia. The state enacted codes to restrict immigration of free blacks and runaway slaves. In order to settle and work in Ohio, blacks had to present a certificate of freedom, register, and pay a registration fee. The black codes also enforced compliance with fugitive slave laws and set a precedent for neighboring northern states to develop their own. The codes became more oppressive in 1807, when they were amended to also require a $500 good behavior surety bond as a requirement for residents. Despite this and other restrictive measures, the black population of Ohio grew annually, as blacks escaped north to freedom by following the Ohio River and Underground Railroad in the state and neighboring Pennsylvania. Abolitionism as a movement began in the state as early as the 1820s, when John Rankin moved to Ripley, Ohio, to join the anti-slavery communities and establish his home as a beacon of safety for blacks escaping the South. The movement gained steam in the 1830s with the founding of the Ohio Anti-Slavery Society, the newspaper The Philanthropist, and Oberlin College. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So, some chaos today in the Pennsylvania State Senate as what should have been something very simple, and that is, swearing people in and moving forward with an agenda turned into absolute chaos as the Republicans, again, power ploy. And as I've said, it really is about fundraising, list building, and jockeying for who's going to be the next Donald Trump. And it's filtering down to our state level. And here to share some thoughts on what today's chaos was, why, how we fight back, and all of that, I've asked our good friend, Pennsylvania State Senator Jay Costa, to come talk with us. Jay, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you, Rick. I'm very happy to be with you and your listeners.
So walk me through what's going on here. I know that there was some anger over Republicans lost a Senate seat out in Western Pennsylvania by a very small margin, 69 votes, which is why everyone needs to vote every election cycle. But this is the center of it, right?
That's right. There was an election past this November where Senator Jim Brewster won the race by 69 votes. The Secretary of State certified that outcome. In addition, his opponent took the matter to court, first to the state court, worked its way through that process, and twice on the Pennsylvania Supreme Court agreed with Senator Brewster's position, and he was the victor. Commonwealth Court also said that the ruling of the Supreme Court should have statewide applicability to every county, including Westmoreland, and then not happy with those results after two losses at the Supreme Court. One was, as I mentioned, and then the second one on the motion for reconsideration after his opponent lost the first one that was denied. They then leave the state court system and run over to the federal court system and raise the same claims and say that the Supreme Court acted in error, and that federal judge refused to issue a temporary restraining order. In response to that, the Republicans said, well, you know what? There's language in the Constitution that allows us to judge elections and judge qualifications, so we're going to create a committee to look at that. And that's what they're doing. And the committee that says we're going to disregard what the state Supreme Court has said on two occasions, Commonwealth Court has said on one occasion, and the federal district judge who refused to stop the certification that occurred. And they're simply saying we're going to disregard and we're going to ignore all that, and we're going to bring it upon ourselves to make a decision. Now, the provision that they're referring to under the Constitution that does grant some authority to the Senate to do that deals with two factors: qualifications of a member, Rick, and also the election. And as it relates to the election, it's around fraud and abuse in the electoral process, and qualifications I mentioned. Neither of those are present here. Jim Brewster is an upstanding man, a man of integrity, someone who represents his district well, and does a very good job working with his colleagues in the Senate on both sides of the aisle. But despite that, they believe that they think they can go and create a special committee which they will control and have a majority of members on that would deny Senator Jim Brewster the ability to serve as a senator representing the 45th District in Pennsylvania Senate. It's unconscionable. It is something that should not be permitted. And quite frankly, it's quite disturbing and quite frightening about where this all can lead. Members can say, we want to establish a committee. We don't like the type of clothes that Senator so-and-so wears. Or do what they did long time ago with Julian Bond when he made comments about the Vietnam War, how the Congress, they tried to throw him out of Congress for his comments. That's what we have here, the potential that any point in time they disagree with the outcome of a court case or disagree with anything else, Rick, they can go to the special provision and say, we want to not have this person be seated and have a vote on that by the members. And it's a majority vote, and they have the majority of the members in the Senate. It's frightening, it's frustrating, and it's wrong.
No, you're right. And this is one of those examples of mob rule that we're told by people like Mitch McConnell that they believe there should be minority rights, but when they control the mob, well, it's a different scenario.
And Rick, if I could add, the same situation is playing out in Washington, D.C. as we speak, and that's played out. There was a Republican congressional woman-elect who won the vote by 6 votes. There were 22 votes that are in question, that are the subject of litigation, and these 22 votes, which could change the outcome, it's also being addressed by a committee in the Senate and the U.S. Congress, U.S. House of Representatives. Nancy Pelosi, to her credit, says, you know what? Her results have been certified. She won by 6 votes. We are going to swear her in and seat her. And she's going to serve conditionally until such time as the courts and the Congress decide the outcome of that election. That's what should have occurred here. That was the offer we made to my colleagues and the Senate Republican caucus. They rejected that. They refused to do that. So when they asked, I said, please do what Nancy Pelosi's, a Democrat seating a Republican and a seat that the Democrat previously held. That's what we should do here. They rejected that. That, to me, is probably what's most offensive. I give Speaker Pelosi credit for doing that. I'm disappointed and discouraged because our Senate Republican colleagues didn't have the courage to do what was right and seat Senator Jim Brewster.
Well, I mean, this is what I've been talking about, the difference between, and this is something I think you as a Democrat and the left is going to have to deal with. What we're seeing right before us is a Republican Party who they have this win at all costs. There are no rules that apply to them. If we need to lie, cheat, steal, make stuff up, threaten, intimidate, that's what we're going to do. And look, we've seen all of that stuff come out of them since the election. Well, for the last 4 years. And this is one of those things where, Democrats, are you willing to go into the muck? I mean, I know Hillary Clinton said, when we go high when they go low, but at some point when they go low, don't you have to smash their face into the ground?
Oh, there's no question, Rick, as you mentioned, we fought tooth and nail today for about 6 or 7 hours on the Senate floor. And every time they tried to do what they wanted to do in this particular case, try to prevent somebody from being seated, we fought. We offered amendments, not only to those fighting that issue, but also on the rules, trying to put into place appropriate rules that I think are more transparent and open that our colleagues offered. And so we fought them at every step of the way. And also we're in court, and we'll be going to court tomorrow seeking an injunction, filing a mandamus action requiring them to seat Senator Brewster. So we'll be going back into the courts tomorrow. But the reason you mentioned at the outset that it was a chaotic scene today was because we, working with our Democratic colleagues, made it very difficult for the Republicans to be able to jam this stuff through. And as you talked about, what's been in place, there's an old saying that absolute power, which they have, corrupts absolutely. And that's where I think things are at in our Pennsylvania Senate for sure. And it's disappointing, but I also think it's resonating in other parts of the country.
No, I mean, I'm hoping, I've been saying for a while, I fear that the only hope we have as a country to not end up shedding blood in the street and having mass chaos is if there are sane, rational Republicans left who say that this has gone too far, and they need to do something in a statesman-like fashion, because what we're seeing is, at least coming from what I see coming out of the Republicans, and clearly you deal with them more often, is this kind of lunacy that, I got to be honest, 10 years ago, I could only, have dreamt of, not let alone see right before my very eyes.
Rick, I've been serving in the Senate for over 20 years, and today was probably one of the more disgraceful days in my 10 years serving. I was once proud of the work we did in the Pennsylvania Senate, the way we did it in a bipartisan manner, and the manner that we conducted ourselves, different than what was taking place and as related to the gridlock and many other things that we see taking place in Washington, the partisan nature of every single thing that's done. We flattered ourselves in our working relationship in the Senate. Unfortunately, those days are gone, and I think because both parties, to some extent, have gone to the extremes, as we know. But they've got more folks to the extremes than we do, and it's been making it difficult for moderates to be able to work together. Now, when you think about the Republican caucus in the Senate, the number of moderate Republicans who served there are long gone. When we maybe had 8 or 9 or 10 across the state who were reasonable, who wanted to work to a compromise and understand what needs to be done to get things done, to reach a compromise, they're gone. Same way in the House. They've been pushed out of the respective chambers by folks who are far more to the right. And it's changed the dynamic in our ability to get things done and work together. And that's frustrating, and that's disappointing, quite frankly. But you're exactly right. That's where we're at. And we've become Washington, D.C. in the Pennsylvania Senate in terms of the bipartisan nature of conducting their business and the hostility that folks have towards one another. Yeah. So it was a very embarrassing and quite frankly difficult and disappointing day for me to serve as the leader and be part of the debacle that took place today and the power grab the Republicans took, not just with regard to Senator Jim Brewster, but also taking over the podium, stripping Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman of his ability to manage the floor of the Senate. He was conducting it in a proper way. They didn't like the way he was making rulings for Democrats, so they said, we're going to take his power away, and we're going to run the Senate floor. Unconscionable, illegal, and just totally inappropriate.
But again, it goes to that point that I was making earlier. There are no depths at this moment that they won't go to maintain and to hold on to power. And look, I'm looking what's going to happen on Wednesday and what kind of craziness is going to come out of this. Now, my fear is, and this is where you as an elected official, you're in this arena jousting with other politicians. My fear is this filters down to the angry crowd, to the people who aren't being served by broken government, who aren't being served by gridlock, who are desperate, who are struggling. Because after all, we are in the middle of a global pandemic. We are in the middle of an environment where potentially millions of people have lost jobs, health care, their homes at some point. There's a lot of tension going on, and my fear is that eventually this filters down into real lives being harmed, and not just words and the kind of things that we saw go on today.
There's no question. You're exactly right. And the issues that we need to be addressing in Harrisburg are pushed back because we have these type of partisan battles that take place and will continue to take place. We saw what took place in Washington with respect to trying to get a CARES package done. We now are faced with a position, not only in Pennsylvania, but many other states, but also hundreds of thousands of local governments that now are going to struggle to be able to make ends meet. At the end of the day, it's going to impact the residents and all these local communities as it relates to lack of resources for public safety, police and fire, for public works, to be able to repair bridges and roads, and provide for the other services that are being provided at the local level, municipal level, and the county level. Not to say that the state levels as well, we're going to have struggles along those lines. So these type of partisan measures and steps and animosity that's created by all this rhetoric is not something that's good for the public, and it's not certainly good for public faith and trust in us as well, elected leaders, being able to get things done. And it's just extremely frustrating and disappointing. As I mentioned, one of the most disappointing times that I've had in Harrisburg in my career.
Yeah, and I've talked to other representatives and other senators who have said the same thing. It's never been this divisive. It's never been this divided. And in fact, one person told me that the Republicans don't even talk to the Democrats. There's really no communication. And in fact, when one of them was sick with COVID, they didn't bother telling Democrats that one of their people were sick and potentially spreading it. Again, they don't care about themselves, and they certainly don't care about Democrats. But it's just that common courtesy just gone. And as I started this off of, is this the country that we are? Is this who we are? Is this who we want to tell the rest of the world that we are?
You're exactly right, and that's not who we are, and that's not who we should be. You made reference to the masking policy. We had to spend about 45 minutes to almost an hour today working to get members of the Senate who are on the floor to wear masks. When the governor has a mandatory mask order, our own Senate rules say we should have masks when we're out in the public and when we're at a hearing or any type of gathering of 10 or more people. Our rules say we need to wear masks. But yet, despite that, we had a handful of members of the Republican caucus who refused to wear masks. We had to go through a lengthy rule process to get them and to adopt a rule that said they need to wear masks. So the bottom line is that's the type of stuff that goes on, and as you say, not having common respect and decency, not only for the members that are there, but today the guests that were there as family members, not worrying about someone else's family that's there that could possibly be someone who has an underlying condition that makes them more susceptible to catching the virus. And I think it's just reprehensible that's the manner how, and that's how they feel about the people they serve with and the people's guests that were there in that building. It breaks your heart that that's where we're at.
Yeah, it's despicable. But let me ask you this, Senator, because there are going to be those who go, but this is the Republicans' right. It's their right under the Constitution. They're simply exhausting all of their challenges and all of their opportunities to win for their side. is what they did today justifiable under that argument that, look, they're simply doing what the Constitution allows them to do?
No, I believe that it does allow them to be able to call for a review of the election and the qualification. But there's nothing there to support that premise or to support that provision in the Constitution. So I don't believe what they did was lawful. It lacked the ability to have procedurally it was deficient, and substantively it was deficient. And by the way, they had every right, and they should have sworn in Jim Brewster. There's no distinction between every other member, the other 24 members that were sworn in today, Democrats and Republicans, than what Jim Brewster did. He received the highest number of votes as based upon the Secretary of State's official election certification. He should have been seated, and then the dispute with respect to the outcome of that election should have been able to play out in the Senate if they so chose, but also in the courts, where it's in a federal court today. We're still going through that process. They simply should have said, we say they should have said, and we agreed to, and we offered many compromises, Rick, to be able to get to a point which they rejected, that would allow Jim Brewster to be seated pending the outcome of the federal court case that's now pending. If Jim Brewster won the election, he would stay. If he lost the election, on final judgment of the courts, if he lost that election, he was going to go home and walk away and not be seated. But he should have been seated just as Nancy Pelosi did in Washington, D.C., in the same exact circumstance. He should have been seated, and there's no question. So their claim to do what they do is they're able to do it. We disagree that they can because it doesn't meet, as I mentioned, the substantive procedural parts of that. I filed a motion to be able to say not accept it and to dismiss it. I lost that motion because I didn't have enough members, obviously, to be able to support that motion. But at the end of the day, there's no question in my mind, Jim Brewster should have been seated, and we should have waited for the outcome. If he had to leave, he would leave. If not, he stays.
Ultimately, today was disgraceful. A black mark on our state across the country and across the globe. And I'm glad there are folks like you in there fighting for us. Senator Costa, I appreciate you taking some time. As always, good stuff, man.
Thanks, Rick. Appreciate the opportunity. Happy New Year to you and your listeners.
Thanks so much, you too. Again, and it comes back to, for me, it will never be enough. There'll never be an answer for them that's enough. Crazy. Quick break. Right back. Stick around.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1933. That was the day that construction on one of the most iconic landmarks in the United States, the Golden Gate Bridge, began. The bridge was built during the height of the Great Depression, where 1 in 4 people in the nation were out of work. San Francisco did not have enough iron workers for the project. Workers from across the nation flocked to the city hoping to get hired. Some of them purchased used Social Security cards and addresses from San Franciscans so they could meet the residency requirement to work on the job. Many had no previous experience with ironwork, but stretched the truth to get hired. The Ironworkers Local 377 coordinated the hiring. The job paid well, but it was potentially hazardous. First, the workers had to excavate 3 million cubic feet of dirt to create the anchorages on each side of the bridge. Then the dangerous work of building the high bridge towers began. The 2 iconic towers soar 746 feet above the sea. The dense fog on the bay made the work all the more slippery and precarious. The project was one of the first to require workers to wear hard hats. A safety net was rigged beneath the workers in case they fell. 19 men fell into the net and lived to tell the tale. They called themselves the Halfway to Hell Club. Others were not so lucky. In 1937, a scaffolding collapsed. It ripped through the safety net. 12 men fell into the ocean hundreds of feet below. 10 died. On May 27, 1937, 200,000 people walked across the completed bridge for the very first time. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So we're in this, again, the middle, as I said, the middle of a global pandemic. Last I saw, at least 128,000 people across the country hospitalized with the COVID-19. It's being reported out of Los Angeles that they're running out of oxygen. I mean, stop and think about this for a second. We've got a major city in the U.S. who's running out of something in the middle of a global pandemic. And we've got a guy in the White House who's supposed to be addressing these concerns still running around throwing a temper tantrum when he should be addressing this. It's insane to me, but I guess I shouldn't be shocked and surprised. And here to share some thoughts on, well, where we are with the big COVID-19 pandemic and where we are with the response, I've asked our good friend Dr. Keith Pochek to come talk with us. Keith, thanks for taking time for us.
Hope things are going okay despite all the craziness in Harrisburg we were talking about during the break.
No, it's nuts what's going on here, and the sad reality again is we're in the middle of this global pandemic, and nothing is getting done.
Right.
The state isn't getting money from the federal government. If I'm a Republican legislator, and I don't want to go too far off of our path, even though this is on point, if I'm a Republican legislator, I am ticked beyond belief because I'm not going to have the resources to help my constituents. The money isn't coming from the federal government to fill the coffers of the state to be able to get people to jab someone in the arm with the vaccine. I'm ticked about that. But instead, what we've got is a bunch of grandstanders and people who are engaging in political theater to raise a boatload of cash for themselves and jockey for position to be the next Trump. That's where their priority is. Screw their constituents, screw the states, screw the history of the Commonwealth. It's about them now, only them.
Yeah, I mean, and look, like you highlighted earlier, look at what's going on in LA County. We're having to ration oxygen in the U.S. I mean, we saw there was a story, I think, out of Egypt, maybe yesterday or the day before, where a hospital ran out of oxygen and every person in their ICU or intermediate care unit died, within hours. And that's how tenuous this is. I mean, and that's how, how fragile some of these patients are when they come into the hospital and are that desperately sick. And so you have a president who's clamoring and spending every ounce of his waking energy to try and find 12,000 votes in Georgia that don't exist when, what he needs to be finding is some fucking oxygen tanks, and getting him out there and getting the resources mobilized. I mean, that's what any president who, actually cared about his citizens and his country would be doing. And sorry for the profanity.
I can't disagree. I mean, the sad reality is it's something that I've been saying all along. While he's throwing his temper tantrum, people are literally dying. And sadly, while we're covering the temper tantrum, I don't think enough people are talking about just how bad things have gotten. The number of people being infected is continuing to go up. The number of people in hospitals are at an all-time record. We're continuing to lose thousands of people a day. There's real crisis going on.
Yeah, I mean, the number of just preventable deaths, as these numbers just continue to pile up, it's it's appalling. It's like starting to look, Stalin-esque. When you look at the famines that happened in the Soviet Union. I mean, and that's what and people are going to say that that's a stretch to make that comparison, but here we are at 360 some thousand dead. And look at what our response has been, and look at what's happened in other areas of the world. We're supposed to be the world leader, and we're doing worse than the third world is, and that's just, that's really because of poor leadership. It's horrifying.
It is horrifying, and it's what's horrifying is, you look at this Operation Warp Speed was supposed to be, we're going to have this great rollout. The numbers that I'm seeing are pathetically low. We've gotten the vaccines out to places. From what I'm hearing, there are millions of them out there. We just don't have the resources or the manpower or the infrastructure to get those vaccines into people's arms who want them. Look, I'm of the mindset, if you're going to step aside, quick, get out of the way and let's get people who want it and need it. Let's get every person in a nursing home. Let's get them vaccinated first. Let's get those frontline people like you vaccinated, of which I understand, and we had talked about it over the break, that you were right there front line as a frontline first responder. You were one of the folks who got it, right?
Yeah, I am. And one of the frustrating things I think is that, the phases are obviously of vaccine rollout are going to bleed together. And I think that we're not going to be able to compartmentalize them as intently and cutely as we would, we would like to. But the goal here is let's get the populace vaccinated. And if somebody shows up a little bit early and they get a shot in their arm, and that means a vaccine doesn't spoil because these things are fragile, then that's fine. And I think that as we move into later phases of this, that's what you're going to see, which will be a good thing in all honesty. I think that it sounds like the production is at a level that we can, we can really start to ramp things up. It's just, it's logistically has been such an incredible challenge, especially with these phases that are so demarcated and so many.
No, I agree with you that we need to, but we start with the vulnerable population first. But why haven't, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I haven't seen a mass mobilization of people who are going to be administering these shots. I haven't seen a mass mobilization, street corner pop-up tents of, hey, come, get your things here. Every veterinary tech, every person who's ever, shot a grandparent with insulin. How come we aren't mobilizing, thousands and tens of thousands, if not millions of people to be the ones holding that syringe, putting it in your arm so we get more people faster vaccinated?
That's a totally fair question. And I think that one of the reasons is that the vaccine is just so delicate and so temperature sensitive, and it's only going to be effective outside of a deep freezer for so long. The Pfizer one, once it leaves that ridiculously cold deep freezer, I think maybe is viable for 5 days. And so the worst thing I think that could happen is that you release a ton of vaccine to some folks who can't quite manage who's going to get it or manage the volume, and then you have a bunch of vaccine that just goes bad. And so I think that's one of the worries that I think administrators have, and it's certainly a valid concern. But the Moderna I think is going to be a lot more portable, just because it doesn't have the storage requirements that are as stringent. And I think that's going to be one, if you see it, go out to churches in underserved communities, or those are areas I think that's a perfect area for that to, or a perfect spot for that to go. Say here where I live in Charlotte is to a church in an underserved community where everyone can just arrive and get the vaccine, and they see their people that they trust who are lining up to get the vaccine, and they see their leaders who are going to get the vaccine, and it gets administered. And I think that's like the ideal way to get at-risk populations actually vaccinated. But right now, I think that the big worry is just the worst thing I think that can happen is someone gets a huge disbursement, or an entity gets a huge disbursement of vaccine, and it gets mismanaged and they go bad.
No, and I fully understand that. But, it's my understanding, and some of the people that I've talked to, that we just don't have enough people at giving the shots. And
I think that's for sure. Absolutely is a valid concern. And, I think you can make a strong argument that, for a spot where I work in the city, why haven't we set up some spots that are just doing this 24 hours a day? We're making appointments, and/or we're going to take some drive up folks, and you roll up at 3 a.m, then that's when we're going to get you vaccinated. So completely valid. I think that what did Fauci say that we ought to be able to right now be able to give at least 1 million vaccines a day, and we're we've certainly ramped up the numbers, I think, over the last few days after the holiday, but we're nowhere near that.
Because, and there's a point at which things are going to keep getting worse, right? I mean, the numbers of people getting infected, and evidently there's a variant of the virus now that do we know if it's going to be the vaccine's going to be effective to this variant? I mean, there's a lot we don't know. How are you seeing this playing out?
I mean, I think that from what I've read so far, the vaccine is still effective against this UK variant that folks are talking about. It's evidently more transmissible. Obviously, just highlights the need to continue doing the things that have been recommended for us to do, which have kept us safe. Previously, which is masking in public and distancing and washing our hands and staying away from gatherings. And still yet we're fighting this war against disinformation, not just on the vaccine, but, on the virus itself.
No, let's talk a little bit about the misinformation, because I've had people say, well, I'm not going to get the vaccine because it was under Trump's watch. And look, it's a valid concern. But at the end of the day, this is still Pfizer and Moderna and still scientists in these places. Do you have faith that this vaccine is effective and safe? I mean, I guess you would have to, because you actually had it injected into you. So I got to imagine you think it's at least safe, right?
I certainly feel it's safe, and the numbers obviously for efficacy were based on, smaller study sizes, just because, when we were trying to hustle to get the vaccine out and released, you had to do some trials, and, the numbers weren't enormous sample size numbers on the vaccine, but to see, 95% efficacy and, this safety profile that we've seen so far as millions and millions of Americans have gotten it. I mean, that's incredibly promising. I think that for those of us in healthcare, we're going to feel so much safer just doing our jobs. And, to be honest, I mean, it's one of those where I told my wife the other day, it's like, hey, if I get 2 shots and 10, 14 days later, there's a pretty good chance I'm gonna want to go back to the gym. I mean, I'm gonna put my mask on and everything, still follow rules, but it's just everybody's ready to to get life back on the rails. And I think that this is really to have a big percentage of the population vaccinated is the way to do it.
Absolutely. Let me ask you this, as a frontline healthcare worker, as someone who has been, really in the middle of this from the beginning, I saw this clip from Georgia yesterday of this guy giving a spiel in front of a large rally, basically saying this is a super spreader event, hug your neighbor, just this kind of just insanity. The stupidity, whatever we want to throw at it. But this guy's saying, I don't care about you or anybody else. Let's spread it so everybody gets it. Hug your neighbor. How does that make you feel? As someone who has seen people sick, as someone who has seen the struggles of this, how does it make you feel? What does it make you think?
Well, I mean, I work in outpatient land, so I think my anger is maybe abated a little bit compared to someone who works in the ICU, works in the ER, works in the hospital. But I can tell you that, we've been doing parking lot medicine and have been trudging through rain and cold weather and hot weather back in August to serve our folks and to keep people safe and to keep our staff safe. And, for us, I feel like this has been unnecessarily prolonged. It certainly has prolonged our angst and our worry and our just kind of drudgery with our job. And I know that the inpatient folks feel the same way, and they feel it in a different way compared to how we do. So I think it's really what it is. It's an ultimate disrespect of healthcare workers, and a lot of the information from inside hospitals and pictures from inside hospitals have been, from what I understand, have been kind of suppressed and beat back, and they don't want folks to see how dire it actually is inside some of these overwhelmed hospitals, when those would be images and stories that actually would potentially change behaviors if we could get the truth out.
No, and that's one of those things that makes me go, I know they don't want to cause panic, but don't we need a little bit of panic? Don't we need a little bit of, oh my God, this is really a horrible death. This is a bad thing. This is something we don't want, instead of saying, no, hug your neighbor. And then when they turned the camera to the crowd, there were a bunch of stupid people hugging each other.
Oh,
A bunch of complete strangers.
Yeah, and and some of those folks are going to get COVID, and some of them are going to get sick enough to need to be admitted to the hospital, and the hospital staff is going to graciously do their job and take care of them like they always do. It's gotten to the point where it's become disrespectful to healthcare workers, and I hope that when we usher in a new administration, that the tone changes, and I think that it may actually give our healthcare workers a little bit of a morale boost. We certainly need it right now.
Oh, absolutely. Last minute I've got, Joe Biden, look, he's going to be president on January 20th. What do you think the first thing he needs to do as president to deal with what you're facing and what we're facing as a country on this virus?
I think the mask mandate, obviously, for sure. I think we have FEMA, and we have military. There are tons of medical resources, I think, that could be deployed to areas that are really hardest hit, and that's what needs to happen first. I like the 100-day mask mandate, but we'll call it a mandate, but we know a lot of folks won't follow it. I think that's a great idea. And then the next one is let's really just mobilize our resources to get the vaccine out and get some shots and some arms, and get all of America vaccinated.
Yeah, it's amazing to me. Donald Trump all through this thing has said, we're going to call the military out, yet the only place where I see our National Guard being deployed is in the streets of D.C. and Wisconsin tonight. It's just, to me, again, failed poor leadership. That's simple.
It absolutely is. Yeah. And this is what you see when you have someone that's this narcissistic who is threatened, and he's gone into nothing but self-preservation mode. There's clearly no concern for anyone else but himself.
Yep,
and
that's right.
That's where we are.
There you go. As always, Keith, I appreciate the time. Always great talking to you, my friend.
Thanks, Rick. Thanks for having me.
Good stuff. Our good friend, Dr. Keith Pochek. Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. Stick around.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this date in labor history, the year was 1914. The Ford Motor Company raised its basic wage from $2.40 for a 9-hour day to $5 for an 8-hour workday. Many of Ford's contemporary critics scorned his $5 day. Journalists and other automakers predicted disaster for the industry. Henry Ford implemented the wage increase to head off labor unrest in the company and to curtail his problems with worker turnover. The wage increase helped to derail efforts to start a union in his factory. The $5 day was not an act of altruism by the automaker. It was a calculated business decision. Most importantly for Ford, the wage increase enabled his workers to become customers and buy cars of their own. Ford declared, one's own employees ought to be one's own best customers. Despite the prognosticators of doom, Ford's plan worked. Ford's profits doubled in the 2 years after he raised the wages. In 1914, Ford sold more than 300,000 Model Ts, more than all other U.S. automakers combined. By 1920, that number had climbed to 1 million cars a year. Reflecting back on his decision, Ford explained, the payment of $5 for an 8-hour workday was one of the finest cost-cutting moves we ever made. If the minimum wage is increased, perhaps those who today are lining up to predict doom and disaster if the minimum wage is increased might benefit from reading this page from Labor's history. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
The rich are different from you and me. For one thing, they're rich. Among the super rich, though, there tends to be a peculiar sense that their net worth is a testament to their true worthiness. Thus, they seem to cling desperately to the very idea of being extremely wealthy. This leads to one specific difference between them and us. Most of us favor a wealth tax to help bridge the gaping chasm of inequality in our society. The rich do not. Indeed, we hear shrieks of abject horror and cries of doom coming from corporate boardrooms and other defenders of the plutocratic order. It would be comical if they weren't so pathetic. They exclaim that such a tax will destroy entrepreneurial motivation, sap innovation, punish success, and, get this, spur a wave of divorces. The psyches of the rich are so fragile, goes this line of bull, that a tiny tax on people with more than $50 million in wealth would keep them from getting out of bed in the morning. Jamie Dimon, a billionaire Wall Street banker, disingenuously asserts that super wealthy people like him would, quote, be happy to pay more in taxes. But he fears the government will just squander it on giveaways, quote, to interest groups and stuff like that. I have to admit that Jamie does know his stuff. After all, he weaseled billions of dollars from us taxpayers to bail out his bank during the 2007 Wall Street crash. Far from squandering revenues on such welfare cases as Dimon, those supporting the wealth tax specifically call for the money to fund universal access to higher education, free health care for all, restoration and expansion of our national infrastructure, and other direct efforts to restore the common good. This is Jim Hightower saying, to help advance passage of the wealth tax and our nation's democratic ideals, go to Citizens for Tax Justice, www.ctj.org.
What do the corporate powers from Wall Street to Walmart have in common? They hate the Hightower Lowdown. You can see why at www.hightowerlowdown.org.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So I got to tell you, I'm looking at what's going on in Wisconsin, and it almost seems to me like there was a coordinated effort to cause chaos, to cause a riot. While on the same day that you have Kyle Rittenhouse, who was the kid who went and shot people in Kenosha, Wisconsin, while he pleads not guilty to 7 charges stemming from the killings there, you also had a Kenosha police officer who was involved in shooting Jacob Blake back in August, let off. No charges whatsoever. But hey, I guess there was good news. The guy who got shot in the back 7 times, they're not going to charge him with anything, which I just thought was kind of that extra jab and just in the craziest of press conferences. And here to share some thoughts on, well, the day in Wisconsin, I've asked our good friend Carrie Pennebaker to come talk with us. Carrie is a gun violence survivor, also a Everytown Survivor fellow. Carrie, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, brother, thanks for having me on again.
So, do you think I'm being a little paranoid by going, it seems curious that today is the day that they chose to roll both of these things out, or is it just bad coincidence?
I'm not sure. I mean, I try to stay away from prognosticating in that regard, but I have no faith in the DA in the southern part of Wisconsin and the decision that they made in not having charges against the officers that shot Jacob 7 times in his back. When you put this in context, though, right, you have an unarmed black man being shot in the back, and for some reason, the powers that be felt, well, that's cool. That's simply okay to do. I think it's a miscarriage of justice, and it just shows how little Black lives actually matter to people like that. And it also shows that they just simply don't value the rule of law. They would rather protect police officers than the people that the officers are supposed to serve.
Now, one of the things, because I had talked with someone today who said, well, he had a knife, and I don't know much about this case, but even if he did have a knife, is shooting him in the back 7 times the punishment for that crime?
There was a case in December with a guy in Utah who had a gun in his car. Police pulled him over for, I believe, speeding. The officers saw the gun, had the guns drawn on him. The guy was able to drive off without having anything happen to him whatsoever. He wasn't shot one time. Nothing happened. He was later arrested, but he was arrested like the way you were supposed to. They see black people as a threat, as the other, as someone that is not worthy of decency and respect and to be treated like a human being. If you commit a crime, there is a proper way to deal with it. And the only way to correct bad police behavior is by having those officers who behave this way to be held accountable. And that rarely happens. And what happened today is another shining example of how justice is not served on those who wear the badge.
No, and it's scary times because, as I said at the beginning of the program, one of the things that's most frightening to me is, I'll be honest, I'm not afraid of criminals as much as I am, police who are a little trigger happy, and these gun fetishists who want their ground laws, so that if you get in an argument in a parking lot or if they start a fight and get their behinds kicked, they can shoot people. We've got this shoot first mentality as a country that's quite frightening.
We absolutely do. And you can see that mentality is usually only applied in one direction when there is a racial component injected into the issue. We're not going to have the kind of justice we need with these kind of people in positions of power.
Right.
We can have good policing that's going to occur when you have police officers who behave this way, and when they aren't being held accountable for it, that just tells them that what they did was okay, and it will continue to happen until we decide we're just simply going to put a stop to this and start holding these officers accountable. There's only one way officers can do their job well, and that is when the bad ones are held accountable for when they do something wrong. Just because you wear a badge doesn't mean you're immune from doing bad things.
Correct. No, I agree with that. But, this has become a political issue, and a major one. I mean, I know a lot of people who voted for Donald Trump who said, well, the whole reason I voted for Trump was because you liberals want to defund the police and you want to disband the police, and we're going to be at the mercy of criminals. And there's part of me that took that as a racial statement. But it's also the disinformation that's out there. I don't know very many people. I'm sure there's some people who want to defund and disband the police departments. I don't know any serious person that's talking about doing that.
And I'm not one of those people. I mean, with all the death threats and harassment that I get from gun rights supporters, it's the police that I call. I value the effort that the police provide in keeping my family safe and keeping me safe. But at the same time, though, I do believe that, and I've said this before on your show, that officers are oftentimes should not be the first ones that respond to a call. They can actually create the chaos and turmoil that turns into a violent or even worse, a deadly situation. So in that regard, resources should be shifted away from pure policing to having the correct response arrive at an incident. But that doesn't mean all cops are bad. Also, something I've said on your show before, there are more good cops than bad cops. But we can't have good policing unless we deal with those bad officers. We wouldn't allow this kind of nonsense to occur in any other profession. And this notion that there's some kind of blue life that matters, there isn't one unless you're a Smurf, right? This is a job. That's it. You're not in a gang. You're not in some secret society. You're just another person in a job. And the only way that job can be improved is by holding those bad actors accountable.
Yeah, so in your view, I mean, because look, as I said, I read an article on this. I don't know all the details. All I know is a white cop shot a black guy in the back 7 times. To me, as an observer reading the article, my first thought is, this is excessive. This is unacceptable. This is beyond the pale. Is there any justification? And what was the district attorney's justification for not bringing charges?
There is no justification for this. So even if you want to make the argument that you felt that the officers were in danger of some sort, The officers should have been trained to be able to detain him before he was able to get back to the driver's side of his car. They didn't do that. They failed to do the basic part of policing. They let a so-called suspect go around the car and get back in to where they thought he was going to be able to access that night, if there was one or not. I'm not sure. But if they were so afraid, why didn't they stop him? They should have had him properly detained, handcuffed, sitting on the side of the car until they were able to sort things out. But instead of doing the right thing, they ended up shooting this brother 7 times in his back. They didn't tase him, right? They didn't use pepper spray. They didn't handcuff him. They didn't tackle him. They shot him. That cannot be your first response to an incident like this. Had they had the proper training, they would have known that's not the right thing to do. But instead, you've got this crazy, almost built-in narrative that, well, we have to shoot first and maybe we'll ask questions later. And clearly they didn't ask enough questions because there were no charges levied against the guy who shot another brother in the back 7 times. That cannot be the way this is supposed to go. No,
I grew up in the 70s, and I remember, and even then, and again, I grew up in a housing project on the west side of Cleveland. The cops generally weren't our friends, but the police were the last person you called. That was after something really bad happened, they basically came in to mop up, because they brought more problems with them than not. I now live in a neighborhood where, when I see a cop, hey, how you doing, Officer Joe? They drive around our neighborhood, hand out glow sticks at Halloween. They go to the schools and, they're buddies. You see them at the football games, all of that stuff. So how do we as a society take my 2 images and the 2 worlds that I've lived in, which are still, I think, as valid today as ever, and figure out how to get people around the common idea that, as you've said, we got to hold people accountable. In my neighborhood, I support police signs everywhere. And I said, I'll have one if I can amend it. I support police when they're not wrong. I don't think that's too extreme. I don't think that's too much to ask for. I support them until they screw up, and then we hold them accountable. But how do we bridge that gap?
Well, first I want to say, as a person who has been beaten up by a police officer before, I can empathize with those who are extremely angry right now. I was beaten up by a black cop. He hit me in the mouth with a billy club, and I can assure you it hurt quite a bit. But I think part of the ways we do this is, again, by holding those officers accountable. And we need to make sure that those who are able and who are afforded the honor of wearing the badge, that they should be of the right mindset to do so. If we would have done that in Ohio, Tamir Rice would still be alive today, right? If we can stop allowing people who have this predetermined notion that they have to, be so hyper aggressive, if we can eliminate that, root that out from the police force, we can bring down these cases of brutalities and shootings and murders that continue to occur. We have too many bad apples. And then what's worse, we have too many people that cover up for those bad apples, to the point where you can't have any kind of improvement within that line of work. Again, you would not allow any kind of behavior like this at all in any other profession. This has simply been turned into something that it really isn't. There was a video over the weekend, I believe, where you had the Proud Boys standing off against the police. And at the end of the video, the Proud Boys are saying, well, F the police now. I used to back the blue, now I don't.
Yeah.
They do these things when it's the police against the rest of us. When the police exert their brutality and that force against them, then they don't, then they switch.
They don't like it very much.
Right. That's a consistent pattern that happens with folks on the right. When it happens to somebody else, good. But when it happens to them, then it's like, oh, wait a minute, this can't be. And it shouldn't be like that. It should be something where I don't want it to happen to me or to you. And the only way to do that is to begin to have some real accountability for these police and get rid of this nonsense of this Blue Lives Matter nonsense. And because what it does, it creates this narrative of that it's like a gang. Because they only begin to protect themselves and not the rest of us. I think that is fundamentally wrong.
And something that we should all be concerned about, because as you pointed out, the Proud Boys there, they were all thrilled. Oh, they're on our side. They're us. They're actually in some cases are them. But they've even turned. So it's one of those things where you don't want cops on either side. You want them to be the fair arbiter of the law. We give them immense power, and I believe with that power comes responsibility.
Absolutely, and they should be held to a much higher standard than the general population should be. When you are able to end a human life like that, you should be able to be required to have an expectation that is much higher than the rest of the population. That you should be able to problem solve quickly. That you should be able to navigate dicey situations quickly. But instead, they will chalk it up to human error or mistake or something like that, but someone then gets shot in the back and nothing happens. That is why it continues to occur. Because if they think, well, nothing's going to happen, I can make this mistake, I can shoot this brother 7 times, or I can shoot this 12-year-old boy in a park, or I can shoot this black man in a Walmart holding an airsoft rifle that is sold in the store. We can do those things because nothing's going to happen to us. And then you got the union that then protects them. They are all corrupt like that. We need to get to a place where we stop taking sides and looking at what is the right thing to do here. It shouldn't be us versus them or any of that stuff. Because at the end of the day, they still got a gun. At the end of the day, I still get nervous when I see police lights behind me. I shouldn't have to be afraid of simply being outside and being black. I don't want to be like that anymore. And I don't want police officers to be afraid either. I want them to enjoy their job and respect the fact that they have an immense amount of authority and power to do a whole lot of good. But too many of them choose to do the opposite. Too many of them are on the side of those who are white supremacists. You should not be allowed to be a cop if you engage in that kind of behavior.
No.
That is simply unacceptable.
No, we definitely live in scary and dangerous times. So, to kind of move us in this direction of solutions, I think a lot of us feel powerless. I'm somebody who says, this is absolutely wrong. It's not my lane though. This is something that, I defer to someone. I defer to you to say, okay, how do we fix this? What is the path forward?
Well, first of all, I would tell you that there is no lane to this. We are all in this together. People who look like may be the target, but y'all still have access that some people don't. I had someone tell me today that they were ashamed of being white. My response was, no, it's okay to be white. Use it for good, though. See an injustice and work to change it. That's where y'all can help stand in and say, we're going to walk right next to y'all and help y'all fight this problem. Part of the things we can do, though, is elect better district attorneys. Because all of them are elected. Some may be appointed at the higher level, but the one that's down in Kenosha is elected. So now that we can see how bad their judgment is, that person should be voted out. Have a better person in who can say, we will not tolerate abuses of power by people behind the badge. We're simply not going to allow that to happen. The sheriff is also elected. Vote that man out, right? We need to get better people in those kinds of positions so these things stop happening. And we need black folks and white folks to band together to make sure this stuff doesn't continue to happen. Think about what happened in the 60s when John Lewis walked across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, right, knowing what was waiting for them on the other side of that bridge, all the evil and brutality that was waiting for them. It wasn't until white people saw it that they actually got involved and said, hey, we didn't know this was actually real. But when that happened, more and more people got involved. Voting started to occur. We got the Voting Rights Act passed, and things like that happened when people decided, I don't accept this anymore. That's what we need to happen.
That's where I hope at some point we get to that point where we've as a society we've had enough. But Curry, I appreciate the time and your input as always. It's tragic situations like this that we end up having these conversations. We need to do this on better days.
I agree, but I am just glad that Jacob is alive. I hope he is able to regain mobility in his legs. But even if he doesn't, I hope he sues them for every penny they got, because this is an extreme injustice, and it should not be acceptable. I don't care what side of the aisle you sit on. There's no way this should sit well with anybody.
No, ultimately it could be any one of us. A sad reality.
Yep,
but Curry, I appreciate the time as always. Good stuff, my friend.
Anytime, brother.
Again, our good friend Curry Pennebaker, gun violence survivor and Everytown Survivor fellow. Scary times. Scary times. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1804. That was the day Ohio became the first non-slave-holding state to enact a series of black codes. Ohio had previously been a part of the Northwest Territory, which barred slavery in 1787. When Ohio entered the Union in 1803, its Constitutional Convention had established the previous November that slavery would not exist in the state. But delegates were split evenly regarding black suffrage and ultimately voted to disenfranchise African Americans. Several months later, Ohio caved to pressure from the nearby slaveholding states of Kentucky and Virginia. The state enacted codes to restrict immigration of free blacks and runaway slaves. In order to settle and work in Ohio, blacks had to present a certificate of freedom, register, and pay a registration fee. The black codes also enforced compliance with fugitive slave laws and set a precedent for neighboring northern states to develop their own. The codes became more oppressive in 1807, when they were amended to also require a $500 good behavior surety bond as a requirement for residents. Despite this and other restrictive measures, the black population of Ohio grew annually, as blacks escaped north to freedom by following the Ohio River and Underground Railroad in the state and neighboring Pennsylvania. Abolitionism as a movement began in the state as early as the 1820s, when John Rankin moved to Ripley, Ohio, to join the anti-slavery communities and establish his home as a beacon of safety for blacks escaping the South. The movement gained steam in the 1830s with the founding of the Ohio Anti-Slavery Society, the newspaper The Philanthropist, and Oberlin College. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
You know, I think back to, when I was a kid, and look, I do have respect for policemen. I've got some in my family. I've got friends who have been cops, but I've known a lot of bad ones, and I've known a lot of them who, it's the culture. I often tell the story of a friend I went to high school with, who was probably one of the most docile human beings I ever met. Big kid. When we went through high school, big kid, like 6'7", heck of a basketball player, until you got physical with him. And he never beat me in one-on-one, because I would just knock him around. And, so he would never just run over me and dunk and, do those things, because he didn't want to come near the lane. And it was one of those things where, it was my goal to toughen him up. So all through high school, I would knock him around, and in the hope that, he would, no, we're gonna get you better so that we win games when we're playing together. And that didn't happen. He became a university cop, not a big city cop, but a university cop in a city. And within a very short period of time, he became abusive. His demeanor changed, his language changed. So bad to the point where within a couple of years he was chucked off for beating people up, for being violent, and that always stuck with me. And it wasn't just the white cops who were horribly racist. It was the black cops too. And I found it interesting that Carrie said, yeah, he got beat up by the police. It was a black cop that did it. It seems to me to be the culture of this war mentality that needs to be addressed. I've been pulled over a couple of times over my lifetime, and it's always interesting how the interactions are dictated by the demeanor of the person pulling you over. I mean, I've been pulled over by a cop who, he comes up, he's, hey, I got you, I got you. And it was not a friendly endeavor. It wasn't a happy moment, but it was, I'm responsible for it. I was, there was no, what you did, and you know it, and no condescending walk. No, I just fell out of a war zone. The last time I got pulled over in a small, sleepy little town like where I live, there were 3 cops that surrounded my car. Like I was, this horrible criminal. And you know what I was pulled over for? This is a horrible crime. The inspection sticker on my car was outdated. I can't believe I missed it, but it was outdated. And that was the crime for which I was then surrounded, and people were literally holding on to their guns. I mean, it was almost surreal. And I've said before, it's the current training that police go through. I observed a while ago that you never see, like in the old days when you'd see on TV, put your hands up against the wall, put your hands on the car. Now it's you're slammed to the ground. You're face down in the dirt with somebody's knee in your back, and people holding your arms and legs. And then all the while they're screaming at you, don't resist. That's their training. They're trained to cause chaos. And to me, that's the wrong message. And I think this is where Carrie has an interesting point. We need to get to a place where police are called for the right responses, that the right people respond to mental health crisis, and that you bring in the guns when you need to. I'm of the mindset, look, I grew up in a place where, there was still some fear of the police coming into the neighborhood, so you didn't have criminals doing horrible, horrible things. You still need that. But there's a lot where you don't. So for me, the allocation of resources in a much better way, a smarter use of our police departments, to me, that's kind of the way I think we need to be going. But for all those people who said, I know you're one of those defund the police people, I'm not. I never have been. I've actually said we need to put more resources into community policing and getting the right resources and the right treatment and the right kind of responses. Instead of this idea that we have a hammer and everything's a nail. Just my thought. Love to hear yours, though. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit about this idea that I've been talking about for years, that if the private sector refuses to create enough jobs, if they can't create enough jobs, that the public sector has to. There has to be some kind of a employment of last resort. There has to be someone who's propping up the economy in moments of mass unemployment, in moments where technology is going to wipe away a bunch of jobs. There's got to be a way to make sure that people can support themselves and lead decent lives. Not mere survival, but actual lives. And when we come back, our good friend John Shilton is going to be here to share some of his thoughts on what that kind of a guarantee would look like, what that kind of a policy might look like, especially now that we're in the middle of this little pandemic thing going on. Going to take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
believe me, it will find an ignition source pretty darn readily.
On way out the door, Trump Transportation Department approves bomb trains. Trump EPA's parting gifts include more asthma attacks and deaths from air pollution. Plus, Japan unveils ambitious national plan to achieve net zero emissions by 2050.
Why can't America be as great as everywhere else in the world? All of those stories and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
It's almost like Trump is trying to be the worst president for every species.
Success! I knew he'd get something right after 4 years. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
I'm sure everything, now that we're in 2021, is way, way better than it was in 2020.
Surprise! Not so much.
Oh, great.
On New Year's Day, outgoing President Donald Trump vetoed bipartisan... Outgoing President Donald Trump.
Oh, yeah, I just like hearing it. Continue.
Trump vetoed bipartisan legislation that would have phased out the use of massive commercial fishing drift nets in federal waters off the coast of California that indiscriminately killed dozens of marine species like whales and dolphins. The Trump administration also reversed long-standing federal policy and approved the transport of volatile, highly flammable liquefied natural gas by rail anywhere in the country, including through densely populated areas and within feet of homes and schools, with no public oversight and over the objections of 15 states.
These are those so-called bomb trains that we have seen. Has been a while, but we have seen them blowing up all over the country.
Indeed, but this would be natural gas, and of course it hasn't been a while. It's been only 2 weeks since an oil train derailed and exploded, causing a fire north of Seattle about 2 weeks ago.
Oh yeah, there's that.
In another parting gift, the Trump Environmental Protection Agency has refused to tighten air quality standards for dangerous ozone, the main ingredient in toxic smog, meaning more children will get asthma and more people will die prematurely from air pollution. One health expert compared inhaling ozone to, quote, getting a bad sunburn on your lungs. Failing to tighten ozone standards, however, does provide marginal profits to oil and coal companies.
Because, of course, it does.
And in its most consequential rollback, the Trump EPA has finalized a rule that restricts the scientific data that EPA scientists are allowed to use when crafting rules to protect public health. The Trump EPA's Orwellian transparency rule actually blocks the use of studies in which the data is either proprietary or researchers have not disclosed confidential patient medical records. Such data had previously been used for landmark regulations restricting air pollution and pesticides, but no data, no rule. A former director of the agency's Science Advisory Board told the Washington Post, quote, this is a bold attempt to get science out of the way so special interests can do what they want.
Amazing how much damage he can do with just 2 weeks left.
The EPA's refusal to tighten pollution standards for ozone and other contaminants is a direct consequence of the Trump administration short-circuiting established federal scientific review procedures. It will take years for the Biden administration to complete the process of repairing the damage that Trump has done. But there is one positive change, sort of. The EPA finally updated the federal lead and copper rule for the first time since 1991, aimed at reducing toxic lead in drinking water, which causes brain damage in children. Health experts welcomed many provisions in the rule, but they said it omits the most important step to get the lead out. It does not require the removal of the estimated 6 million lead service lines still remaining across the country, allowing them to remain in service for decades to come.
So I was going to ask why they would possibly do something good. And I guess there's your answer. If they do this part of it, they can block the other part of it for a long time?
Yes. However, there is some justice for residents of Flint, Michigan. More than 6 years after the city's drinking water was contaminated with toxic lead in a wide-ranging, shocking scandal, Michigan's Democratic Governor Gretchen Whitmer has signed a $640 million settlement to compensate residents and establish the strictest lead and copper water quality standards in the nation. And finally, Japan has announced an ambitious green growth plan targeting net zero carbon emissions by 2050. The Japanese government's plan establishes roadmaps for the nation's different industrial sectors to achieve the net zero goal. It includes funding that will triple renewables in the country's energy mix and includes the phase out of conventional gasoline-powered vehicles within 15 years.
See, it's not all bad. Don't be such a crybaby. 2021 is looking up already. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find, follow, and share us planet-wide on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So as I've been talking about for some time now, we're in the middle of this pandemic. We've got some real economic problems going on. We've got some chaos. We've got things that need to be addressed. We've got things that seriously have to be dealt with in the next Congress. This idea that we're going to have policy that's going to move us in a better direction is something that I want to see happen, which is why Georgia is so important. And one of the things that I keep coming back to is this idea that we need to get people jobs. It's one thing to ensure that there's going to be some bit of help through stimulus checks, through guarantees of people not losing their homes, through foreclosure and all of that. We need to make sure that on the other side of this, there's going to be enough jobs for people to have. That to me is extremely important. And here to share some thoughts on maybe how we get to that point. Because as I've said before, if the private sector can't or won't create enough jobs, it's got to be the public sector who signs in, which is why we've asked John Shelton to come talk with us. John is a professor at the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay, sporting his green colors. John, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks so much for having me, Rick, and hello to everybody out there.
Yeah, you went total green screen for us, so I'm not sure why we did that, but good on you. But let's talk about the jobs guarantee. This idea that the public sector should be the employer of last resort. Because I've said for years I'm against welfare programs. I'm against handout programs. I want jobs. I believe in people having the dignity of work and all of the therapeutic qualities that come about this. And the public sector has to be that place that guarantees that everyone has survivable wages and the kind of job that you can live on.
No, look, that's exactly right. And you go back to the founding of this country. The basic premise of this country, it was of world historical importance, is that we're going to have a society that's built on life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? And I believe in all three of those things, and I believe that Jefferson, with all of his contradictions, knew what he was writing when he said that, right? It's not just about having freedom from government intervention. It's also about, like, if we take the pursuit of happiness seriously, how can you actually pursue happiness if you don't have an economic livelihood? And to your point, how can you sort of fulfill your sort of values as a human if you don't have something useful to do? We're kind of, as a society, wired to be that way. And I think, so the economics of this country have obviously changed dramatically since 1776. And we're in a position now where, virtually everybody except for millionaires and billionaires has to work for a living every day. And, so we need to ensure that everybody has the ability to work if they want to. And we're just not doing that. There was a story in the New York Times on Sunday. I'm looking at it now because I wanted to cite the numbers. Since the pandemic started back in February, almost 8 million people have fallen into poverty. That's the biggest plunge in 60 years. 85 million Americans say they have trouble paying basic household expenses, and that includes food and rent. And there's now 10 million fewer jobs than there were back in February. I mean, think about that for a minute. So if we're going to really come out of this pandemic, let's take Joe Biden at his word, we want to build back better, then, we really need to think about a government jobs guarantee, right? Basically saying if we want everybody to have economic security and to have decent lives in the pursuit of happiness, we have to set a floor. We have to set a basic level of economic security for everybody. And that means jobs. And when the government needs to do the work of ensuring everybody has jobs.
No, absolutely. And, I've said one of the first things, and I said this during the first day Trump took office. I said it both times that Barack Obama took office. I said it back during when George Bush was president. We need a massive infrastructure bill to put people back to work, to build the things that we need. There is so much that we need to upgrade, that we need to build for the future, that we could easily employ millions of people on projects that need to be done. But the other side of this for me is I do believe that there's a therapeutic quality to work. There's something in that a job well done mentality, and thinking that, look, I've made my way. I've always been against the idea of welfare and handouts for people who are able to do something. And this is one of those moments where if you were to go in this jobs route, that maybe this is another way to not divide us anymore. Because one of the things that's happened, and I'm sure you get it too, is, the Republicans have done a masterful job of using the welfare queen as this narrative to keep us divided. For me, if we're all in this, we're all working, we're all rowing in the same direction, there's nothing that can divide us.
That's exactly right. I mean, we need to have almost like you think back to maybe the moment in American history where people were most united, right? And it was probably World War II. Right. I mean, arguably, of course, like the American Revolution, but World War II was sort of this moment of national emergency. Right. I mean, the United States was fighting fascism worldwide. And so it really had this sense of a mission, a national mission, right, to not only, save the country, but also, I mean, as FDR argued during the war, we've got to come out of this freer and more democratic and more stable. So imagine saying right now that we're going to come out of this COVID crisis, not just giving everybody a job, but dedicated to making every aspect of our society better, right? And what would that mean? Well, number one, you mentioned infrastructure, right? I'm not an expert on infrastructure, but every year the national, whatever this national
American Society for Civil Engineers.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you. They come out with these grades for America's infrastructure, and it's always subpar, right? It's pretty much subpar everywhere. So number one, we could improve the transportation system, but number two, we've got an environmental crisis that we're going to have to deal with, right? And so the best way to do that is to tie that into a jobs guarantee, right? Give people jobs retrofitting buildings and building green infrastructure. But you could go beyond that too. I was just reading in the Green Bay Press Gazette today about what the childcare system in Wisconsin looks like. They're projecting that something like a third of the childcare providers in this state are going to close permanently as a result of COVID because because they can't service as many people. They're not making profits. Well, it's already hard to find childcare for most people in this state, and I assume other parts of the country as well. And it's unaffordable. So imagine tying childcare, the guarantee of childcare, into this jobs guarantee, and basically telling people, hey, we're gonna bring you into this kind of work, and you're doing a service to this country. Not only are you having a job, but you're providing childcare to everybody, and what you're doing is you're part of this moment to really build everybody up, right? And if we do that, I totally agree with you. That's how we bridge some of these political divisions in this country, right? That's how we have a government that actually works for everybody again and gets people to stop questioning the damn elections, and who won, right? I mean, because now people will have faith in the ability of this government to actually do things for its citizens.
Right, but here's the thing, and I'm looking at all of this chaos and all of this tension that's going on here in Pennsylvania, in our nation's capital, in Wisconsin, where you're at. I'm looking at all this chaos, and for me, and you could agree or disagree, I think it all comes back down to the fact that we've had 40 years of supply side voodoo economics and some 40 plus years of bad neoliberal trade deals and policy that have created a desperation class of people in this country. And we've got folks who grew up like I did, believing that if you work hard, you play by the rules, you got ahead. And that's not happening. You got people who are struggling, and the anger level, the stress level for everybody is ramped up, and it's manifesting itself in this team sport politic, this Hunger Game mentality of mine, and this winner-take-all mentality that my team has to win, and it leads us to, I think, nowhere positive.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, so there's a sort of historical critique or historical explanation for why the United States becomes conservative, right? And a lot of it, for some people, hinges on sort of backlash against the civil rights movement, right? That you have these white working class people, mainly men, actually, right, who see the civil rights movement as a threat to white supremacy. And, for that reason, they become conservative. Reagan, of course, exploits that, right? I mean, like he, has his campaign launch in 1980 in Philadelphia, Mississippi, where the 3 civil rights workers were murdered. He knew exactly what he was doing. So that's sort of one way of looking at it. But there's another way of looking at it too, which is, in the 1960s and 70s, there were a couple of efforts by civil rights activists to basically have something like a jobs guarantee. So in 1966, 67, A. Philip Randolph, who some of your listeners probably know, who's the head of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, and then the organizer actually of the March on Washington, Randolph, and one of his collaborators, Bayard Rustin, pitched this idea called the Freedom Budget, which was a massive infusion of money that would have effectively guaranteed jobs to everybody in this country, white and black. And what Randolph and Rustin understood is that the best way to bring racial equality was to also give everybody economic equality, so it wouldn't pit people against each other. That fails. Johnson's not all that interested in it. And then there's another moment to kind of revitalize that idea in the 70s. This time it's led by Coretta Scott King, and Augustus Hawkins, this representative from California, and Hubert Humphrey, the white. Hawkins is black and one of the chairs of the Congressional Black Caucus, and Humphrey was white and a senator from Minnesota, of course, and vice president under Johnson. So they push for this thing called the Humphrey-Hawkins bill, which would have effectively guaranteed every person in this country a job. And Coretta said, this is Martin's legacy, right? And so you take that moment, that was the opportunity really in a lot of ways, because the economy was going under, and you had this war on workers from corporations trying to send jobs elsewhere and prevent people from organizing. If you could have got something like Humphrey-Hawkins, that would have been a game changer. But what happens to it? Well, obviously the same conservative forces that try to stop big social change were involved. But it was actually the problem was actually Carter, and it was this sort of new group of like professional class Democrats, people like Joe Biden actually, who stymied Humphrey Hawkins and basically watered it down to the point of it sort of being meaningless. And so that was really kind of the first. It's exactly what you're talking about. The first foray. Conservatives are going to do what conservatives are going to do, right? They're going to try to empower businesses. They're going to try to prevent workers from having rights. But it's really, to me, the story of where Democrats have gone wrong since that time. And I mean, you said it, man. Clinton going, negotiating NAFTA and putting this downward pressure on blue collar jobs, and really not doing anything to enhance workers' rights. I mean, Clinton pitched a plan to ban striker replacement actually in 1992. That went nowhere, but NAFTA, was a major priority. So I mean, of course, if you're not going to offer anything to working class people in this country, then it becomes easier to actually, kind of exploit the sort of tensions that exist. I'm not saying that, there aren't Trump supporters who are racist and that, we should be charitable to all of them. But it is the case. I think it's exactly as you said. You give people a meaningful stake in this country and you ensure that they have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And we can bring people together again. I really believe that.
No, for me, it comes back down to, as we've been saying, for me, I've said for years, for me, it's not black or white, it's green. The only color that really matters is green. It's the economy, stupid, to steal Carville's line, even though they weren't going to do anything to expand it to everyone. And I'm glad you brought up the fact that the Democrats are at the heart of this, because I just had this conversation with a union friend of mine today who said, are we surprised that, the voters in our union are split because the Democrats have done virtually nothing to help them. And a perfect example, and my wife's going to roll her eyes. I met Barack Obama twice. Twice I shook his hand. Twice I said, are we going to get something, the Employee Free Choice Act? And twice he said, absolutely. And I said, something better? Absolutely. We didn't get anything. And that was another one of those moments where missed opportunity. I mean, Carter was the same thing. There was talk during the Carter years of overturning Taft-Hartley. Clinton, there was the strike replacement thing that Bob Dole filibustered, and we never heard from it again. And Obama with the Employee Free Choice Act, nothing. So the question for Biden is, is he the guy who's going to continue the legacy of the last three Democratic presidents, or do working people get a champion, a fighter, an FDR-esque type person in the White House, or are we just going to see nothing?
Yeah, and that really is the question. I mean, to go back to Obama for a minute, I've written about this several times actually, but he gave this speech in 2008, February 2008. I remember it because my daughter had just been born and I was in the hospital watching this. And I shouldn't admit this because I was 30 years old at the time, but 2008 was the first presidential election I voted in. I wasn't 30 yet. I'm sorry. I was like 26, but anyway, I was younger. And old enough that I should have, voted several times. But I saw this and I said, that's my guy, right? This is my guy. He gave this speech in Janesville, Wisconsin, where he said, I know that you've been told that by politicians that, we're going to come in and reform things, that we're going to stand up for workers' rights, that we're going to renegotiate trade deals. He specifically called out NAFTA by name. And I thought, this is somebody who's actually different. This is somebody who gets it. This is somebody who's going to break with the DLC. And then he becomes president. And, I don't want to diminish the healthcare bill that he passed. That did have some really meaningful things for people. And so I don't want to totally diminish that. But, he like you said, EFCA didn't really go anywhere. And then he negotiates the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which was like sort of NAFTA for the Pacific Rim. And, Hillary Clinton had to own that. And so, Trump totally exploited that. I mean, you look at the stuff he said in 2016, some of it was just bonkers, but a lot of it was talking about how Americans had been, just basically working Americans just been destroyed by free trade deals. And he was right about that. Right. And so, that's why you have, I think that there were something like 7 or 8 million people that voted for Obama in 2008 that then voted for Trump in 2016. And many of them were union members, I'm sure. And that was probably enough to swing the election. So this is really the moment. I mean, to my mind, Trump, or not to my mind, in reality, Trump got more votes this year than he did in 2016. Biden only won because Trump had sort of massively, galvanized this resistance to him and galvanized people to come out and vote. So if Biden's going to be anything more than a one-term president, he really does need to show that he's going to do something to actually make people's lives better. And if we win both of these Senate races tonight, that's the moment to do it. I know, Manchin is not going to give up on the filibuster. That's a longer term conversation we need to have if we're going to get something truly transformative like a jobs guarantee. I don't expect that out of Biden, but it's time to start talking about that. And he better do something. To your point about infrastructure, do something to give jobs to those, 10 million people that now don't have them because of COVID. If you don't do that, you're going to be in big trouble 4 years from now.
No, and also, I mean, someone like Manchin should want a jobs guarantee representing one of the poorest states in the country, who would
Absolutely.
massively benefit from it and massively benefit from an incredible infrastructure plan. I mean, there's the part of me that goes, I don't get how we're in this political moment where you're not fighting for your constituents. I know we went through the whole Tea Party era of earmarks are bad and pork is bad, but you know what? That's what brought jobs. That's what brought infrastructure projects. Bridges to nowhere eventually went somewhere. And it was because of government investment that stuff happened. The Electrification Act of the 40s, doing all of the things that we did during the CCC and the WPA era, built rural communities and helped the rural communities as much as it, if not more than it did to cities. So this idea that we can do big things, I want to get back to that. I was just, talking to somebody the other day and I said, the last big thing that we really did was we put a guy on the moon, and that was over 50 years ago. What have you done for us lately? Let's think big. Let's think futuristic. Let's think huge. But all we get is, John, and you know this, Well, you're talking socialism. A jobs guarantee, and I've been hit with this every time. Well, that's socialism. We can't have that. Is what we have now working?
Which is just utterly crazy, because the idea that you would put everybody to work, that you would ensure everybody who wants a job has one, the idea that that's socialism is just nuts. I mean, but it tells you how disconnected from reality our political discourse is, right? I mean, the ideas that we're willing to entertain have been so narrowed, right? I mean, think about the Great Depression for a second, right? Like you mentioned some of those programs. I mean, unemployment was through the roof. It was a national emergency. And there is really good evidence that programs, especially the Works Progress Administration, actually significantly reduced unemployment, probably to the point where there's sort of a debate about this, but some of the most compelling stuff I've read is that the WPA probably was actually responsible for beginning to get the United States out of the Depression, right? And so you had this big crisis, and the idea was we can do big things to try and not only solve this crisis, but in the process make our nation better. Yep. Those are the things we need to be talking about, and that's the agenda Biden really needs to set. Now, I don't know if he's going to. I don't know how much he's changed since the 1970s. I'm writing a new book now, and I have a quote in there from Biden where he basically says, in response to Humphrey Hawkins, he says, when is Hubert Humphrey going to realize basically that you have to have some limitations on the things that you're trying to do, that you have to be realistic, right? And this is a guy who'd been in the Senate, Humphrey, for 30 years at that point, and had seen everything come and go, and he's making this his sort of last mission. Humphrey actually died, while this was being debated. And Biden says, no, we need more realistic expectations. So I don't know how much he'll change, but I hope that he sees in this political moment that we absolutely need something transformative, and he's got to start setting the tone for it. Whatever happens tonight, whatever we end up with in the Senate, he's got to start setting that tone for the future.
I agree. Absolutely agree. John, I appreciate the time. Good stuff. I hope you'll come back and share some more thoughts with us down the road. This is something that I want to get some mind behind and some push behind. So I'd love to have you back.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got to elevate this conversation. I think it's imperative.
Good stuff. Thanks so much. Our good friend John Shelton, professor at the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay. Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Real quick before we wrap up tonight, I want to throw a shout out to our good friends at FYI Nation, the folks at FYINation.com. They'll appreciate you carrying the program. Our friends and affiliates across the country. Also, our good friend Joe Eastman, who's on the mend. Appreciate you being back and sharing some thoughts. Wish you the best, brother. Keep the healing. But so much more to get into the middle of. But I go back to this for a moment, just to kind of wrap this up. We can, in this moment, think big. We can think transformational thoughts. We can pursue policies that are not going to just make our lives better, but our children's lives better. I think back to my grandparents' generation. They came back from World War II, and they built the largest, most prosperous working class in the history of civilization. And they did it because they thought big. They did it because they believed in science, and they believed in their government. They believed government could make things better. We're in this moment where we've been trained for more than 40 years to believe that the government's the problem. The Reagan's 9 words. I'm from the government and I'm here to help. We need a government that's going to be here to help, especially in this moment. We've lived through 4 years of government not working. We've lived through 4 years of Republican governance, proving to us that Republican government does not work. I'm hoping, as John pointed out, that Joe Biden is the person we're hoping he is. We hope he moves in a way quickly to help quash this pandemic, moves on the mask thing, moves on getting vaccines into people's arms, but also thinking big on infrastructure and the jobs of the future. Just my thoughts. I'd love to hear yours. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. If you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com, that's where you go to get the podcast, the Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much for checking in. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com.